What is your rotator cuff? How the heck did I even tear or injure these muscles to begin with? What are going to be the best exercises for my rotator cuff? And what should I avoid at all costs if I want to have a happy, healthy rotator cuff? Let's jump into it. Let's go. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only. If you're experiencing pain and discomfort, please consult a qualified medical professional. Hello everybody, my name is Glenn. I'm a personal trainer and I help people like you with rotator cuff discomfort. So if you've got discomfort, what's the first thing you gotta do? You gotta figure out what's wrong. And to do that, you have to understand your rotator cuff anatomy. So if we take a look at this beautiful image above me, we can see the rotator cuff is made up of 4 different muscles. So you can see the anterior view. This is if you were looking at a human body. This would be someone's right shoulder. You've got something in the very front called the subscapularis. And what that's going to do is that's going to rotate the shoulder inwards. If you look on the posterior side, what you end up seeing is 2 different muscles. One's going to be the infraspinatus and one is going to be the teres minor. And both of these muscles are going to rotate your shoulder outwards. Now you'll also notice that on both images, you can see a muscle on the very top, what's called the supraspinatus. This muscle is usually the one that gets torn when you see or hear rotator cuff tear. It's the most susceptible to being torn. You can tear any of these 4, but that's the most common. We'll talk about why shortly. So the supraspinatus muscle lies on the top of the shoulder blade in this little cavity up here, and it runs across and over the top of the humerus, and its job is to help bring the arm up and away from the body. And we can see if we look at the anterior view now on the right side of this image, we have a muscle called the subscapularis. There's a couple different regions of it, but the different regions all end up helping your shoulder and arm turn inwards, rotate inwards, as their prime directive for movement. Now, there's one other thing I'm going to mention about these rotator cuff muscles, and this is super important. Please don't skip over this, is that in addition to these movements of turning your shoulder in and turning it out and bringing the arm up and away from the body, really what these muscles do extremely well is they actually act as joint managers during movement. Because they sit so deep in the body, they're far away from the skin, they're the closest things to the bone. They do a really poor job at actually creating movement, but they do a really wonderful job at actually managing the shoulder sitting inside the joint while it's moving around or at rest. So this is essentially your rotator cuff anatomy, what these muscles do for the most part, and why you're most likely to start feeling some issues in the supraspinatus is what we're going to talk about next. So how do we end up tearing our rotator cuff muscles? Usually the reason our rotator cuff muscles tear is because we either have poor movement mechanics, we're moving in a way that's not great for our body, and that's coupled with lower output in our muscular system, meaning there's either less strength or less endurance or less speed of muscle use available that causes us to beat up these rotator cuff muscles. What ends up happening is they often get pinched or caught in other structures and there's rubbing. This friction ends up creating small tears in the muscle, and over time we might get either a complete tear because we used it too aggressively and there's no longer any integrity, so it completely rips or tears, or it might be slower over time, kind of tearing or ripping in the musculature. Take a look at this video real quick here. As you can see, we've got that rotator cuff muscle here. We've got that supraspinatus on top, and we've got those 2 posterior muscles we'd mentioned before. But as we continue playing here, we can see, yeah, that's going to be a better position, I think, right here. We can see that there's this bone that sits above that top muscle, above that supraspinatus. And because there's other structures in here as well, by you bringing your arm up and away from your body in different ways, those rotator cuff muscles get stuck and they wear and tear. And that's ultimately what causes your body to end up having these tears in your rotator cuff muscles, as shown right there. And so it's important, if we want to take care of our shoulder joint and we don't want to be pain discomfort, we want to have all the function, that we get the muscles around our shoulder stronger so they can move us appropriately, so we don't beat up the rotator cuff muscles, so we don't beat up the tendons, so that we can move freely, so that we feel amazing. Because if we have weak shoulder muscles that can't do what we want, we far greatly increase the likelihood that we're going to have that pinching and that friction in a rotator cuff muscles, causing that tear and ultimately causing us to feel in pain and discomfort. All right, I've got 4 exercises for you to help you with your rotator cuff. The first 3 are going to be absolutely crucial. The last one's a bonus one. I think you'll like it. If it feels good, I highly recommend you do it. Here are the best 4 exercises for rotator cuff health. Number 1, a cable internal rotation. I set the cable up at about elbow height here, and I'm holding the handle, and all I'm thinking about is trying to turn my arm all the way in under control, having a good hard stop at the end, turning all the way back out, pause, and then repeating, turning in, pausing, and coming out. It's all under control. Go nice and slow so you don't irritate your joint as well, and don't try to force range of motion. Do this thing with control. It's going to help you get the muscles in the front of your shoulder stronger. We're talking here about the subscapularis. Now, the second exercise is going to be for the muscles of the back of that shoulder joint, the posterior rotator cuff muscles. These ones are going to be the infraspinatus and teres minor, and it's very similar to the first one, except we're going the opposite direction. This time we're turning the arm outward, so the cable's still at elbow height, my apologies, and we're still turning it under control and pausing at the ends of each of our range, and we're turning in and out. This is going to work those posterior muscles. The next exercise is going to surprise some people, and that is going to be a single arm cable pull down. I've got this cable not right above my head, but upwards and a little bit forwards, and I'm pulling my elbow down and in towards my hip, and I'm letting my arm come as long as I can without pain, discomfort, moving nice and comfortably. The reason we're doing this exercise and the reason why it's so important is because it's going to help retrain the muscles how to move appropriately overhead, as well as train some of those rotator cuff muscles as joint managers. I love this exercise. It's one of the best ways to get back in overhead movements. As someone who has torn a rotator cuff, I use this with all my personal training clients, and they all tell me they feel great. The last exercise, our bonus one, this is going to be a cable shrug. You might have seen people do this at the gym with dumbbells. It's suboptimal. You can see I've got the cable in my hand, and my arm is actually coming down and out a little bit. I'm thinking about trying to pull my shoulder up and in towards my ear, and then in my arm come down and out again. And this is actually going to help strengthen the neck muscles, because some of your neck muscles actually help rotate your shoulder blade upwards. They help it move so that you can actually get your arm up overhead, help you have the appropriate rhythm, which is just to say movement that has to happen between your shoulder blade and your shoulder joint as you bring your arm up above your head. And if you can do these shrugs and get your neck stronger, well, guess what? It actually takes pressure off your shoulder joint and helping you move and exercise pain-free. I love this one as well. It is the 4th exercise. I highly recommend, if this feels good, you do some cable shrugs. So what are the exercise and movements that we want to avoid at all costs? It is going to be number 1 culprit, without a doubt, the overhead press. See, a lot of people, they end up tearing the rotator cuff muscle because they do a lot of overhead stuff, either in their work as a laborer or in the gym. What ends up happening is that supraspinatus muscle, the one at the top there, as I mentioned before, it gets caught between your arm and the bones at the top and the other structures that are in between, just from you bringing your arm up overhead. So that means that we have to start being cautious about how much overhead stuff we're doing. I would remove any overhead pressing that you have from your program at all if you have a torn rotator cuff or if it's completely torn. Get rid of it. Second of that, in the similar family, but a little bit different, forward pushing movements. Anything that's going to have your elbows up and away from your body, that's going to have to use some of these rotator cuff muscles to stabilize that joint as that elbow comes away from your body, will put more stress on the rotator cuff and potentially make things worse. So any pushing where we're up here, not going to be a very good idea. That means planks on the arms, planks on the elbows, all these things we should reconsider. Some people down the road can get away with pushing with elbows in. Depends on who you are. If you're not sure, get it off the table right now. The third thing that I want you thinking about avoiding is going to be aggressive front shoulder arm movements like this. Anything we're trying to raise that arm up overhead. You can kind of see the pattern here, right? This is where those muscles at the very top, that supraspinatus, is more likely to get caught and tear. We're trying to remove that noxious stimulus by avoiding overhead pressing, forward pressing, and aggressive arm coming forward movements. Some people are going to be okay if it's a very small tear and they're being very cautious, but most people, even then, that's going to be off the table. We want to avoid these overhead pushing forward shoulder joint positions. There's likely going to be more damage caused by doing them. Get them off the table. Final words of wisdom on taking care of your rotator cuff. When you're moving and you're doing exercise with it and you're trying some of these exercises, start light. Pick something you think you can do for 15 to 20 repetitions. Go slow, take it easy, have rock solid starts and stops at the end of the range. If you're doing the turning in and turning out, you come all the way out, hold, all the way in, hold. Go slow, make sure these positions are nice and solid. And if anything bothers you, please stop doing it. You're only frustrating and making things worse. If you feel pain, discomfort, please consult a professional, get the necessary diagnosis and imaging done so that you know exactly what you're working with. And from there, you can then reverse engineer and figure out exactly what exercises are going to be best for you. Everybody, my name is Glenn. I'm a personal trainer here in Newmarket, Ontario. Help people like you move and exercise pain-free. Please subscribe to this channel if you like it, or share this podcast, video, however you're consuming this, with your friends and family if they've got rotator cuff stuff. I just want to see more people move and feel their best and do everything in life that they really, really love. And it's hard to do that without pain. Okay? Have a great one, everyone.